G'day and welcome back to Reality Check Q&A, where you get the chance to put the blowtorch on your host, Ross Coulthart. G'day and also hello to Megan Urada, who's going to ask me the questions.
Hey Ross, good day to you. We are actually going to start with something from you this week. You posted on Twitter, whistleblower goes public on Immaculate Constellation, alleges covert U.S. program monitoring UFOs. You were one of the first to talk about Immaculate Constellation. What did we learn here?
Okay, this is a very, very important story. This is a guy called Matthew Brown, who I think at the moment he's working for the State Department, but he was working for the Defense Department when he became aware of a lot of confidential UAP related files that were on the JWIX server, the confidential servers used for communication inside the defense and intelligence community. And what he discovered formed the basis, he confirms, of the Immaculate Constellation document that was tabled in Congress last year. It's a very, very important fact that Matthew has now gone on the record and admitted his credentials to my friends and colleagues George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell, because there were a lot of people suggesting that Immaculate Constellation, the document, was essentially a hoax, a forgery, and that it didn't amount to much more than a hill of beans. Now we know from Matthew on the record that Immaculate Constellation is, in fact, a special access program code name that was brought in after Lou Elizondo went public in 2017 with the fact of the Pentagon's ATIP UAP UFO investigation program. And boy, some of the stuff that Matthew says is really important. He's essentially describing the worst nightmare, I think, for a country like the United States that prides itself on democratic accountability. There are so many very interesting quotations from Matthew, and there's a couple here that really worry me. One is, it's a parallel reality. The secrecy apparatus is all persuasive. It's not just in the intelligence community governing their world. It's not just the military protecting their operations. It's not protecting diplomats and leaders as they conduct their work, sometimes in very dangerous places. It, and he's referring here to the legacy retrieval and reverse engineering program, it has been allowed to corrupt and infest every aspect of our society to serve the interests and whims of a very elite select few. Amusingly, for those of us at NewsNation who broke the Dave Grush story, Dave Grush's name apparently was absolutely verboten. He was a non-person inside the Defense Department. You weren't allowed to raise, he says, Dave Grush's name in any of the chat groups relating to this issue. He raises a lot of concerns here about the unnecessary secrecy attached to the program. He says, the secrecy that has been defended is at the cost of, in my mind, human dignity, freedom, and progress. It is no longer permissible or acceptable, in my mind, to continue this course to deprive another generation, not just of Americans, but humanity of their birthright to know who they are, where they came from, and what's with us. We have, as a country, he says, allowed ourselves to be penetrated, co-opted, and corrupted by an internationalist force that serves their interests and views nations, peoples as tools and means to an end. This is really serious stuff. He's basically suggesting that there's a state outside the United States, a cabal of people, an internationalist cabal, I presume business related, which is essentially protecting the secrecy of the program and doesn't give a hoot for democratic accountability. And I know I'm giving a long run to this, but I think it's really important that we go into some of the detail of what he describes. One of the things that he describes among a lot of the videos that he says he saw on the system, very clear videos of obviously some kind of anomalous object. He can't confirm, of course, that they're non-human, but whoever is operating these craft has highly advanced technology. And there's a moment when he describes an object hovering over the Pacific Ocean at night off the coast of Kamchatka, which is a Russian secret military base. And there are several Russian naval intelligence vessels on the ocean, clearly, apparently waiting for this object to arrive. And there's a still color image obtained presumably by a US submarine or some kind of surveillance device at sea level, which shows a large black triangle floating in the air. Now, the implications of that are actually quite concerning, because if it's something the Russians were waiting for, it implies it might possibly be Russian. Which begs the question, have the Russians developed technology ahead of the United States? And is part of the reason for the secrecy surrounding the Immaculate Constellation program and every other aspect of the legacy program, is part of the reason for this secrecy because the US doesn't want to admit what we've been saying here on Reality Check for some time, which is that there is a grave risk that we are being overtaken by our foreign adversary rivals because of the secrecy surrounding this issue. Many scientists in the program have been telling me for some time that the secrecy in this program is confounding advancements that could give America a foreign adversary advantage. And this is the issue. There is a genuine concern in the scientific community in the black world that we are shooting ourselves in the foot. And this is something that President Trump needs to respond to. The big question in my mind is, I'm pretty sure I've actually engaged communications with Matthew Brown previously. I suspect he reached out to me at one stage last year, and we did have preliminary conversations. And I know he was at the time incredibly nervous and trying to wrestle with what he was going to do. At the time, he wasn't going to go public on TV. So it's a big step that he's made this move, and I can only assume it. He's done it for the best of motives. The man is a patriot. He's a good human being. He needs to be protected, as he's revealed in his interview with Chris Sharp for Liberation Times, and also the one with George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell. Actually, Chris took his stuff from George and Jeremy's interview. He's concerned about retaliation. He's concerned about threats. And he's also concerned about the possibility that he could even be executed for revealing what he knows. This is serious stuff. Congress needs to do something about it. We can't have a situation where, as has happened with Jake Barber and David Grush, Congress just goes, and moves on. This has to be investigated. This is a senior person in a senior government position with a top secret compartmentalized security clearance, revealing things that raise grave concerns about America's national security. Let's get it investigated. Let's put him in front of a public hearing, and let's also find out why he wasn't allowed to give evidence at the hearing that took place last year, because my understanding is that he was hoping he would have been able to. Let's protect this person. Let's let our Congress people and our senators know that the revelations of this person matter, and the White House needs to do something about what he's said.
Well said, Ross. Our next question comes about another whistleblower from Lizzie. Hi, guys. First, thank you for all your incredible work and ongoing efforts in this field. I have been following intently since the start and support you all the way. My question is, what has happened to the Age of Disclosure documentary with Lou Elizondo? It seems to have never been released, fallen off the face of the earth, and no one's talking about this. There's also been no updates from Lou. Ross, can you fill us in? What do you know? What's happened and why? Thank you.
Okay, so there was a premiere of the Age of Disclosure documentary at the South by Southwest Festival, and the producer, who is one of the co-executive producers on Age of Disclosure, Dan Farrar, the other executive producer is actually Lou Elizondo. The producer, Dan Farrar, made it very, very clear that he would be seeking ideally a cinematic release or some kind of streaming release. And sadly, these things take time. You have to find a cinema chain or indeed a streamer that is prepared to pay the money to run the documentary. And I agree. I think that it's taking unnecessarily long time. There's huge public interest in this issue. One of the things that I know is featured in the documentary, and we know this because it's been written about by people who've seen the film. I think Marek von Rennenkamp has written about how a former CIA director, James Clapper, or maybe he was DNI, Director of National Intelligence, has actually gone public with what he knows about a non-human intelligence. This is far too important for this to sit on the shelf for the next few years waiting for cinematic release. Let's get it out as fast as possible. I do think I can understand and I sympathise with Dan and Lou in their efforts to try and get release for this film. I just hope it comes out very soon. I share your frustrations. I'm aware of what's in the film. I know it makes extraordinary dramatic allegations from first person, very, very senior people who've worked at the highest levels of government and national security and intelligence. And I think it's time the public saw the film. But one of the problems we have, and this is something I'm facing as well, is in Hollywood, a lot of the producers have their heads up their butts on this issue of UAPs. They are really resistant to giving it the coverage that it deserves. And even though you, the public, the watching public, think this is a story, and by golly, I know the level of public interest in this issue. As a journalist, I have never in my long career as a journalist covering any subject of interest, I have never, ever had the degree of public interest in an issue as much as I have on the UAP issue. It's taken me, it's taken NewsNation completely by surprise, and we're very gratified by it. It's why we have a show like this. We know there is an audience out there that wants this story, and by golly, we're going to bring it to you. And I'm sincerely hoping that Dan and Lou get an opportunity to run Age of Disclosure very soon. By the way, gents, if you would like an arena to run it, we would be very, very happy to run it on NewsNation. I can guarantee you a slot. We will run it tomorrow for you. So there's the offer.
All right, next question comes from Ruben. Hi, Ross. I grew up LDS, Mormon, in an area filled with NASA, Lockheed, and Boeing employees. And an old friend once mentioned that her son, who worked for the Navy, said they preferred hiring Mormons for sensitive positions because of their lifestyle. Given that background, have you ever heard of any connections between the church and the UAP phenomenon? Thank you.
Wow, this is such a good question, and I'm dying to answer this one. Yes, I have. Mormons are incredibly overrepresented in the program, in the legacy program. I have lost count of how many people that I've met who are working in the legacy program who are people of Mormon background, and they're great people. And I just wonder whether it's got something to do with the fact that Joseph Smith, when he received the, forgive me if I've got my narratives wrong, call them tablets or metal sheaves. The whole story of Mormonism is based around the idea that Joseph Smith was basically given a lot of the early ideas of Mormonism in metal tablets that were provided to him by a UFO. So maybe for people of faith, the idea of being able to verify this by getting involved in the legacy program is important. I'm told also by more cynical people inside the program that there is in fact a very good reason for using Mormons, and it's because they are extremely good at keeping secrets. I can assure you that not all of the Mormons are keeping secrets. Some of them very kindly are speaking to me. So yes, there is definitely a link between the Mormons and people involved in the program. I don't know 100% why, but I suspect it's largely because some of the hidden facilities underground are in Utah. I'll leave it at that. You might be aware, that for those of you that follow my Twitter, that I have flagged recently that we are doing a story that will be touching on the significance of secret underground facilities across the United States, in particular in one state. And you might just want to keep an eye out for that. You'll be starting to see promos very, very soon. We intend discussing the location of a known underground defence facility that we believe is involved working with retrieved non-human technology.
Okay, Ross, this next question is coming from JP. Hello, here's my question for the next Q&A with Ross. Hey, Mr. Big Dog, and I assume he's referring to you here. Last week, you touched on the Harold Malgrim interview on Jesse Michaels. To me, one of the most fascinating revelations was the connection between the Angletons and the Knights of Malta. What are your thoughts on the Knights as it pertains to the UFO mystery, and where could we begin to find out more? Thank you.
Oh boy, now this is a goodie. Now, look, I was privileged enough to be able to speak to Harold through his daughter Pippa before he passed. And yes, I am aware that Harold had a real focus on the role played by the Vatican, which, after all, is the body that essentially gives agency to the Knights of Malta. And he believed very, very strongly that the Vatican was in this subject matter up to its ears, particularly the retrieval of the magenta 1933 UFO craft that was retrieved by the fascist Mussolini government and eventually secretly handed over to the Americans. And I understand the interesting thing is you've got to know a little bit about your American espionage history. Alan Dulles, who went on to become the director of the CIA at one of its worst times when it committed some of its worst criminal acts, right through to the horrible revelations that came in during the Church Commission in the 1970s. Alan Dulles was based in Switzerland during World War II, and he was part of the OSS, the precursor to the CIA. And so we know that Dulles was involved with the Vatican and the Knights of Malta in that retrieval. And we also know that James Jesus Angleton, who went on to become the notorious counterintelligence boss of the CIA, he was in Milan. So you had two of the people who are principally involved in some of the dirtiest secrets of the CIA working for the OSS at this time in the late mid 1940s, when the knowledge of the magenta craft was passed on to the Americans by the Vatican. And yes, it's central to what Harold Malmgren alleges that the Knights of Malta are involved. And one of the things, if you actually go through the number of people who are members of the Knights of Malta, it is mind-blowing if you look at senior people in the Air Force, senior people in government. There are an incredible number of connections involving the Knights of Malta. And yes, it has crossed my mind that when you have people like Matthew Brown, for example, the latest whistleblower, talking about how this is an internationalist cabal of people, are they using the Knights of Malta as cover? And is the Vatican involved in assisting this cover-up? I think they are, and I've long thought the Vatican is much more involved in protecting this secret than people care to admit. Multiple sources have told me, even though the Vatican denies this, that the Vatican has long been aware of non-human intelligence and that their files, their archives, are replete with details of UFO sightings, UAP craft sightings, going back as long as 1,000 years. If there is one institution in the world that sits outside of the American national security state that's the most likely suspect for facilitating how this happens, it's the structure of the Knights of Malta and the Vatican. And I do not think it is any coincidence that Dulles, Angleton, and a plethora of people, including people who are serving in the US national security establishment right now, are members of the Knights of Malta. Supposedly, it's just an honorific title and just a fancy title that you can put after your name. But is it? That's what I'm investigating, and I'm very, very interested in hearing from anybody who has any more information on this.
Okay, our next couple questions, these are coming from the Rendlesham Forest interview that we posted last week. Hello, Ross. Watched your interview with Gary Hesseltine. Fascinating interview. Ross, do you think the Pentagon or some rogue organization funded by black projects is abducting and terrorizing people with the MILABs, military abductions, that happen from time to time? What do you think the purpose of such an operation is and its end goals, if true?
Okay, so there's two issues here. There's the Rendlesham case of December 1980, and there's the issue of what are called MILABs, military abductions. And it's long been a part of UFO UAP mythology that the US military is somehow secretly involved in abducting people and, for some reason, assisting non human intelligence beings, entities, in some kind of scientific study or activity with abducted humans. I, for the life of me, don't know if that's true or not. What I can tell you is I've spoken to multiple people who claim to have been victims of MyLab abductions, and I, I, I don't know what to make of the abduction phenomenon. I've recently interviewed Jacques Vallée, who has speculated about this in his Forbidden Science journals, and you'll see my interview with Jacques Vallée shortly. What is interesting is there is a commonality, there is a theme to a whole lot of people from all over the world who are describing being in this kind of weird realm where they're allegedly being abducted. There are alien beings there, allegedly, and there are men in uniform, American military uniform. And this isn't just one or two people that have spoken to me about this. This is dozens of people. There's a huge commonality to these reports. Let's go to Rendlesham. I do think there was American involvement in prompting what happened at Rendlesham Forest in December of 1980. Increasingly, I am led to the view that there was an operation underway. I've been aware for some time that a huge C-5 Galaxy aircraft arrived several weeks before the Rendlesham Forest incident at RAF Woodbridge, which is one of the two Royal Air Force bases that were in use at the time as a joint American-British base. And I'm told that there was a special tarmac set aside that was strengthened for the C-5. Oh, and by the way, it was at the very end of the RAF Woodbridge base, right adjacent to the Rendlesham Forest. And yes, there are witnesses that I'm aware of who, for various reasons, were able to pass through the forest at that time, and they saw activity underway. It has also been suggested to me, and this has been fairly recent, that there was a psionic summoning operation being operated experimentally at Rendlesham at this time, and that what the United States was doing was using people with alleged telepathic psionic abilities to try to summon and perhaps operate a craft, a non-human craft. And it has been suggested to me that what happened at Rendlesham was what's called a link loss, that whoever the psionic was that was operating the craft, they lost the link. And that might explain why the craft landed briefly in the forest and then was able to then be retrieved. It took off eventually whilst allegedly people were watching it. And this happened apparently over multiple nights. I'm intrigued by the Rendlesham case, and I'm looking forward to a film that's being made at the moment called Capel Green, which is going into some of this detail. I'm very excited to be able to see that film, hopefully later in the year. I'm also hoping to talk in more detail to Colonel Charles Holt, who has contacted me recently and expressed an interest in wanting to give more detail on what he knows, hoping to speak to him shortly, and maybe we can bring him on Reality Check. So yes, my labs are interesting. I don't think Rendlesham was a case of a military alien abduction. What I do think it was, though, was an incident where there was allegedly a psionic link loss. And that's telling, because if it was happening in 1980, that's 45 years ago. 45 years ago, they were using psionics to engage with non-human craft. Think about that. Think about what they might have achieved in the 45 years since.
All right, Russ, this next question comes from Tristan. Is anyone ever going to mention the Todmorden case that same year? I think that case is as significant as it is so multifaceted, not far away and around the same period.
Wow, I'm so pleased somebody's asked me about the Todmorden case. I'm a West Yorkshire boy. I was born in West Yorkshire, where Todmorden is located, and I've always been interested in this case. So there was a policeman called Alan Godfrey, and in June of 1980, he was involved in a really weird case where the dead body of a man called Adamski, I can't remember his first name, it wasn't George Adamski, a dead body of a man called Adamski from memory was found on the top of a kind of a coal slag heap in this mining town called Todmorden. And apparently he was buck naked and his hair had been shaved. And there was a real mystery as to how this guy had gone missing. He'd been missing for 3 days, and there was never any explanation for what had happened. Roll forward to, I think it was November of 1980, which is 1 month, just a few weeks before the Rendlesham case. What was happening? Alan Godfrey himself was on patrol in the town of Todmorden, and what he describes is, I think he was responding to something about, I mean, this is a farming town, mining town. There were cattle, apparently, that were wandering around the town. And so he went to investigate, and I can't remember the full details, but apparently he was abducted, and that's the account that he gives. I'm hoping at some stage to be able to bring Alan Godfrey on the show, not least because I love his Yorkshire accent, and I've heard him interviewed before. I'm fascinated with the Todmorden story, because you've got this death involving a man found on top of a slag heap in June of 1980, and then in November, almost getting towards the same time as the Rendlesham incident, you've got this weird thing that happens to a policeman where he's allegedly abducted. I'm fascinated with the case, and I've heard Alan tell his story before, and I find him highly credible.
All right, Ross, thank you. That is all the time that we have for today. We will take more questions next week. You can email us realitycheck@newsnationnow.com.
Thank you very much, Megan, and please send in your questions. We enjoy doing these Q&As. They're good fun. It gives us a really good heads up about what you're interested in. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And please don't forget to click that red subscribe button to ensure you get more of NewsNation's unbiased and fact-driven news coverage.